Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's Welcoming Wednesday webinar series with today's theme of pollinator habitats. We are so thrilled that so many women have joined our second in a series of webinars by and for women interested in conservation and climate smart practices, caring for the land and community. I want to recognize and thank the NRCS and Renewing the Countryside for supporting this initiative. We'd also like to take a few minutes to introduce you to MNWiC with these slides. So, to give you a sense of the landscape, the fertile landscape that we're working in, women producers are managing over 9 million acres of farmland in Minnesota. Women farmers count has increased since 2022 to over 12,000. So our objectives for this initiative are to welcome all women in agriculture and land stewardship, to increase women's knowledge and understanding and use of conservation and NRCS programs. We are here to shepherd women through the process of program assistance and hopefully build a lasting legacy of relationships and regional networks. As you can see from this slide, female farmers are involved in every type of farming, from grain and oilseed crops to sheep and goats and other animals, vegetables, fruits and nuts, flowers, and pigment producers. We have 4 regional administrators, regional coordinators, and they're with us today. Allison Ryan from the North Central Northeast region, covering Aiken and Itasca County. You can see the number of female farmers and farms and acreage per county. We have Alex Kiminski with us from West Central, Upper Minnesota Valley region, from Lackaparle, Chippewa, and Swift counties. Again, you can see the count of female farmers and farms in the region. Noreen Thomas is with us today. Noreen and Alex are actually hosting this webinar. Noreen is representing Clay, Norman, and Wilkin counties. And Maddie Barch, who is with us, they're representing Goodhue, Rice, and Dakota County. And you'll see the high numbers of female farmers, farmland, and number of farms in these 3 counties just south of the metro. How do we reach women and serve them with this NRCS program? Potlucks, webinars, learning circles, and field days. We will have 4 learning circles this year in 2025 and 4 field days. And we hope to be delivering a webinar every month and potlucks as often as possible. So please join us every 4th Wednesday of the month. Follow us on MNWiC, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and go to our website for more information. So thank you very much. And now I am going to pass this over to Alex.
Thank you, Burke. And thanks everyone for being here. If you came in a little later, we're throwing our favorite pollinators in the chat and maybe a little about where you're from. And now I'm going to present our next speaker, which is Karin Jokela from the Xerces Society. Karin is a pollinator conservation specialist with the Xerces Society. She collaborates with NRC staff in Minnesota and Wisconsin to provide individual consulting to farmers on habitat restoration and biodiversity conservation, and serves as an advisor to staff of other conservation organizations. Karin received her master's in ecology and evolutionary biology from Iowa State University. She and her husband also steward land near Cannon Falls, Minnesota, where they have managed a variety of enterprises, including organic vegetables, a native plant nursery, kernza, and a small ruminant livestock, among others. Biodiversity cultivation is a central tenet of their operation. So without further ado, Karin, take us away.
Okay. You can see my slideshow, right?
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for the introduction. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for allowing me to be part of this. I'll tell you a little bit more about who I am and what I do in the next couple of slides, but I just want to give an overview. Like, this is pollinator habitat, kind of a 101, and I'm framing this in like a why we care about pollinator habitat, like who are we trying to conserve when we create pollinator habitat? In other words, like, who are the pollinators and how do we do that? And each one of those questions could be like broken out, and we could create another couple hour talk on each one of those parts. So this is, I'm not going to be able to do this justice in maybe 20 minutes, but I do want to kind of lay some common groundwork, and then allow Noelle to go above and beyond after that. And then we can create, have a conversation afterwards. So that's where we're headed. Before I get into the content, and let's see if I can get this to advance. Sometimes there's a lag. Let's see if I can do it that way. Okay, there we go. I just want to say a few things about the Xerces Society. That's the organization that I work for. We are a nonprofit wildlife conservation organization that works to protect invertebrates and their habitats. Sort of one of the many taglines we have is that we are working to protect the life that sustains us. These are the little things that run the world. We do this through a variety of programs. I work in the biodiverse agricultural, what do we call it? Pollinator and agricultural biodiversity program. That's where most of our field staff work, but we do a lot of other things related to endangered species conservation, how to reduce pesticides. We do things on like all kinds of scales in the urban space and rural space and private lands, public lands, all these different areas. I also wanted to say thank you to any of you who already are donors in our audience, and also to encourage those of you who aren't donors to consider becoming a member. This is a little bit like public radio, where you join and support this larger project, this collective conservation work. And when you join, you get these little perks like a pollinator sign, or we also just created a pesticide-free sign. And I just wanted to highlight this. I always feel a little sheepish about making these plugs, but I do think that this is really important now more than ever. We're largely supported by federal grants, and that's very tenuous right now. And our membership fund has always allowed us to do really novel and experimental things that have pushed us forward in like restoration ecology and how to support the little things. And so those of you who are donors are so appreciated. Thank you. And then I also wanted to say a little bit about my specific role, especially for those of you who are farmers in the audience, because I am here to support you. I am a partner biologist with NRCS, and in that role, I get to work directly with farmers. I work with the conservation staff in the offices. I also work at all kind of the area level, the state office level, helping to refine technical documents, seed mix design, making sure that all the pollinator habitat we put in is good quality habitat. So these are just some of the things I do. I work across Minnesota, and I even work in Wisconsin a little bit as well. And then now I'm going to start getting into that why pollinator habitat. And this is kind of where we start at Xerces, which is that we say little things run the world. That's because most of the biodiversity on this planet is represented by things without a backbone, or invertebrates. You can see of the number of species that we have described on this planet. So this is not like microorganisms like bacteria, of which we are just beginning to describe those. Most of the organisms on this planet are invertebrates. So you can see I've made this huge ant trying to proportionally show how many of them are these little things. Plants make up 20% of described life. And most of the things that get kind of the wildlife conservation dollars and attention, things like birds and frogs and pandas, those are the things that have a backbone, or vertebrates. And they are no doubt important, but it's these little things that I think really matter. And so we at Xerces are constantly trying to remind people that Our lives are bound up, the fate of our lives is bound up in the fate of these insects' lives. These are insects that do so many vital things on this planet in different ecosystems, above ground, below ground. They're moving nutrients around, they're decomposing things, they're offering free pest control services, they're turning plant material into little protein packages for other animals to consume and digest. And of course, they're also helping plants reproduce, which is what I spend a lot of time explaining to people, is, you know, how pollination works. But I also just thought I would mention that, you know, it's not just about like these services or these like, you know, the why isn't just what services do we get out of insects. It's also like, how do insects make our lives better and enrich our lives on this planet in so many other ways, right? These are insects that can inspire joy, that interrupt my life in the garden or on the farm with like little unexpected kind of thrills. This is the wildlife that we have in all of our backyards. Wherever you live, there are insects, and we are suffering from this sort of extinction of experience where children just don't have access to wildlife, one, because they're going extinct or declining, but also because they just don't have that kind of just access to the outdoors. So part of my mission in promoting insect conservation, pollinator conservation, is also because I think it's so accessible and brings all this meaning to our lives. This is still part of this sort of why this is what drives our work at Xerces, is that, you know, we see all these insects are declining for a variety of reasons that interact and kind of synergize. I won't go into all these details, but I did just want to highlight at least one species that's getting a lot of attention lately in the news, which is the monarch butterfly. The overwintering numbers, these are the overwintering numbers that just came out maybe month ago or so, maybe a few weeks ago, from the western population that goes down to Mexico and overwinters there. And you can see that the overwintering number measured in the total hectares, or on this graph acres, that they're covering in the forest is about 4.42 acres. Last year was the second worst year on record, and we've doubled that size this year, but I would say we're still in very risky territory in terms of the vulnerability of this population to become extinct. This is the western monarch population numbers from this last winter. A lot of us up in the Midwest probably don't know too much about the western population, but there's a western population of monarchs. They overwinter on the California coast, and their numbers are also crashing. You can see that this last winter was the second worst winter on record. There were a total of 9,000 or something, 9,000 something butterflies that they counted. And that's with greater, you can see this blue line is greater monitoring effort. So we're definitely worried about monarchs. But at Xerces, we really try to focus on solutions. And so even though there are new papers and new evidence coming out every day about the decline of species, what I'm showing you here in the front is this paper that we published in 2019 with some collaborators, just kind of emphasizing we need more research, but we also know enough to act now. And so this paper highlights all the different ways across all the different sectors that we can be taking action now to conserve these vital invertebrates and pollinators. So now I'm going to quickly move into the who of what we're talking about here, because I think it's important to define our terms. And also when we're designing habitat and thinking about how to promote these little things, we need to be really clear about what their needs are in habitat. So I like to, if this were a live audience, this is a little bit more interesting. But when I say like, what is a pollinator? What are we even talking about here? Are there any images here that you would say are not pollinators? I don't know how this can work virtually, so I'm gonna just move forward and tell you for the sake of time. But a pollinator is anything that would move pollen from one flower, the male anther, that's kind of the technical botanical term, to the female stigma on another flower of the same species. So many insects do this. Some of them do it very well, and some of them do it kind of accidentally. Some of them visit flowers, but are not for nectar, but their bodies are not shaped in such a way that carry pollen. But the ones that I have X'd out, these are beneficial insects, very, very important. Visit flowers, but they're not moving pollen around. These other insects, we do lump into the umbrella of pollinators. And I also included this kind of picture of somebody using a paintbrush to hand pollinate a flower, only to show that that is something that is an extreme we could go to someday. We could still have some crops that require, that kind of pollination. That's not the world I want to live in. I want to support all these other insects that will do this on their own. But bees often get a lot of attention when we're talking about pollinators, and for good reason. These are insects that are very, very efficient at moving pollen from one flower to another. There's a few different reasons for that. One of them is that they're actually using pollen at all the different life stages. So as adults, they're consuming it. As young, they're consuming it. They're actively putting that pollen on their body and carrying it around with specialized hairs and moving it down to nest cells to feed their babies. They're also doing this in a very efficient way in that they're visiting the same flower species over and over again. So for example, in the spring, they wouldn't be visiting randomly like an apple tree and then a dandelion and then a willow. They will exhibit what we call floral constancy or flower constancy, floral fidelity. You'll hear a lot of different terms there, where they're visiting a willow flower, then a willow flower, then a willow flower. And so from a willow's perspective, that's what you want. If you're a willow, you can't really do anything with apple pollen. So that's why they get a lot of attention, for good reason. Just a quick kind of snapshot of, there's a lot of different kinds of bees out there, wild bees, all different shapes and colors and tongue lengths and different pollen collecting hairs. And we have over 20,000 species in the world. Just to skip right back down to Minnesota, we have 508 and counting in Minnesota. So that's an astounding amount of bee diversity. That's just the bees. That's not thinking about all the butterflies and other things that we also consider pollinators. So to bring it into we're starting to get into the how, but thinking about pollinator habitat. What is it that pollinators need? They, like a lot of other wildlife, they need food, they need shelter, and particularly insects, they need refuge from pesticides. That's refuge from herbicides that might impact their habitat, and also insecticides that might directly kill them or sublethally kind of create impacts. So food I have as a big category because bees need nectar and pollen. Butterflies will need different host plants. So a lot of different specificity in terms of different kinds of plants that different insects need in the landscape. So I'm going to go through each one of these categories really quick. So insects or pollinators, they need food throughout the growing season. And I like to show this as sort of an idealized picture illustration of a farm. We don't have very many farms that look like this in the upper Midwest. But what I like about it is that it helps me visualize different gaps on a farm landscapes, large or small, that I could be filling. That, a farmer that I'm working with might already have an orchard, but maybe they're missing this other bloom period and that kind of thing. So this really helps me get my imagination going about what features in the landscape could be supporting pollinators at different parts of their life cycle. And I also like to point out that agricultural crops can be really important for pollinators. A lot of pollinators are really specialized on the raspberries or the sunflowers or various herbs or different things like that. And so I think there's a lot of times this idea that if we create pollinator habitat, it has to be this meadow over there. Like that's my nature. That's my pollinator habitat over there. And this is where I garden, or this is where I farm. And these are my food crops. And I think that there can be a blurring of that, so that we understand, like, we interact with all of this. We're dependent on pollinators for our own food crops. Some of these pollinators really prefer our food crops. So anyway, I'm getting a little long-winded on that, but I'll keep going. The other thing that pollinators need is nest protection. So they need food, of course, to bring into their nest, but then most of the time they're actually in their nest, eating that pollen package or developing on something else that that their mother has provisioned for them. So they really need undisturbed spaces to successfully get through their life cycle. A lot of times that's underground. And it's usually just one mother kind of burrowing a nest, creating these little bedrooms where she puts a little pollen and nectar in a ball, lays an egg on it. Sometimes it's in a stem. Sometimes they use little leaf material, like you can see in this image up here, where they've cut out, a leaf cutter has cut out these little crescents. She's using that as, you could think of it like wallpaper or like a little sleeping bag. And so anyway, they need all these different things for their nests. And I wanted to point out that our native bees largely are solitary. And that means that it is very different than honeybees. They don't live in a big colony. It's just one mother bee provisioning, like going out foraging many, many times, thousands of times, to collect pollen, build this nest, lay an egg on it, and then she dies and she never gets to meet her young. So what I'm showing here is that probably right around here in March, where we are, there are pupating bees in the ground. Pretty soon, when the cues are right, some of them, and there are many bees that will emerge at different times throughout our growing season, but this is just one example of a bee that might emerge. The male might emerge first, wait for the females to come out, and then the female is out foraging for a little while, provisioning nests and kind of carrying out her life cycle. Once she's provisioned enough cells, then she dies, and the rest, and then it kind of moves along that way. And I guess the reason I like to show this is to show that yes, they need those floral resources, but they also need that nest protection for the rest of their life cycle. In contrast, our one truly social native bee is the bumblebee. These are bees that are social on an annual basis. So starting at the top here, we have like a overwintering queen. Those are the only bumblebees in our landscape right now, are queens that are already mated. They are nesting somewhere, probably underground somewhere. And in the spring, fairly soon, we will be seeing some queens that emerge and they start looking for a nest site, and they start looking for high quality resources to start building up workers to grow their colony. Assuming they find those things, they start growing their colony, they start, the workers go out. Eventually the queen lays new queen eggs and males. In the fall, all of those emerge, they mate, and again, to kind of follow through this life cycle, the only ones that overwinter are the newly mated females or newly mated queens. And I guess the reason I'm going through this life cycle is just to kind of point out those vulnerabilities. So if we're really trying to support bumblebees in our landscapes, one of the things that's really vital for them is this high quality early season forage for those queens, and high quality forage in the fall for them to fatten up and get through a hard winter and be ready to create a new cycle in the spring. And I say all of that to contrast with honeybees, which a lot of people think of when they're thinking about saving the bees or creating pollinator habitat. And honeybees are amazing species that are very worthy of stewardship, of getting to know. They have these really unique products. They have fascinating social systems. But they were brought here with colonists, and they support our agricultural system, no doubt. But they are managed by humans. They are not at risk of extinction. They suffer from a lot of the same problems that native bees do, but we don't expect them to go extinct, because we'll be able to carry them through. Versus our native bees, many of them are at risk of extinction. They're not managed by humans. They are nesting in the wild. They have a lot of vulnerabilities. So I just wanted to point that out, that at Xerces, we're really trying to show that these native bees can support agricultural systems, and they are really threatened. Okay, and then the third thing, remember I was talking about the things that pollinators need is food, shelter, and pesticide protection. Xerces has a lot of resources for how to protect plantings from pesticides, how to reduce pesticides, all kinds of literature on ways to reduce pesticides, impacts of pesticides, and so forth. This is just one that I like to highlight when I'm speaking with an audience that includes a lot of farmers, because there's just some guiding principles. This illustration that I really like is on the back side of it's just a 2-page guidance document talking about kind of distance from where you would put pollinator habitat versus where you expect pesticide exposure to be occurring. The backside also includes just practical testimonies from farmers about how they protected their habitat and made a strategic place on the farm that would be protected from habitat or protected from pesticides. So our resource library has a lot of other publications on pesticide reduction.
Thank you, Karin, so much for all that information. We really appreciate
I'm
it.
just going to slide through here. I know I'm going over, so I'm just going to slide through here. Xerces has tons of materials on how to create habitat. I only have a few more slides, and I don't want to go into Noelle's time because she has really good solutions on how to create habitat. But there are a lot of ways to realize habitat on a farm. Annual, perennial, manage it. A lot of different ways that will support all of these kinds of insects. And plan it out well, make a plan for stewardship. And there's a story in this picture, but I will move forward. And visit the website for more resources, guidance documents. This is what we really do well, is create guidance to help you succeed in your technical habitat implementation. And now I will zip it and let Noelle take the floor.
So I'd like to introduce everyone to Noelle Harden. If we can highlight her, she is University of Minnesota Extension educator, gardener, and pollinator advocate. In 2020, she received a permit from Moorhead to plant one of the city's very first garden or boulevard gardens. With a Lawn-to-Legumes grant, she was able to establish a backyard pollinator paradise. Noelle will share her personal experiences and highlight the ways that we can keep pollinators going, even in our backyard. She's a wealth of information. Take it away, Noelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Noreen, for that great intro, and Karin, for your presentation. I learned so much from you in just a few minutes. So it's really an honor to be here with my fellow pollinator friends today. And I will just take a moment here to pull up my slides and go to the very end. And Noreen, can I get a thumbs up if you see those here at the top of my screen? Awesome. So I am just thrilled to be here to talk about, first of all, my own, I like to call it a boulevard garden. And that's what you're seeing here in the photos on the screen. So I started creating my pollinator paradise in Moorhead about 5 years ago. And in fact, even before I purchased my home, the previous owners had been doing a lot of planting of fruit trees and shrubs, and kind of made it easy for me to continue that journey. So what you're seeing is Google Maps shot of my property. I have a double lot situation on a corner. So what I did in 2020 was convert the boulevard, which is if you have a sidewalk on your property, it's the strip of land between the sidewalk and the road. So this is technically owned by the city, but it's the homeowner's responsibility to maintain. So in the city of Moorhead, they have a policy and a permit process where homeowners can plant vegetables, plant pollinators, or choose to do something other than grass with that part of the property. So if you're curious if this applies in your area, you can look for a boulevard planting, or sometimes they call it a right of way, or simply contact your planning and zoning department, or even your city or county administrator if you have questions. But in 2020, it was kind of a culmination of things. So I received a Lawn-to-Legumes grant. I also am friends with the director of Cass County Soil and Water Conservation. So he was able to help me source plants and to pick out plants that would be blooming at different parts of the growing season. So as Karin talked about, thinking about having food throughout that whole season is really important. I'm also involved with our local food policy council, and we were working with the city of Fargo across the river to legalize boulevard gardens at that same time. And another group I was involved with, Resilient Moorhead, was gearing up and looking at climate change strategies, include different types of plantings that we could have other than grass. So these all kind of came together, and I decided, why not? Moorhead just started allowing boulevard gardens recently. That's what I'm going to use my Lawn-to-Legumes grant for. I've also got some fruit trees, shrubs. I think these are really important because they tend to be some of the first bloomers in the season. So even before my flowers are really coming up very much, those are starting to bloom. I also have some dispersed pocket plantings. And you'll notice that those tend to be taller than 36 inches. Why is that? There's a maximum height requirement for the boulevard planting basically for safety considerations. So anytime my plants get too tall for the boulevard, I end up moving them to a different part of my yard. And then in the future, I'm hoping to do some seeding of clover in my lawn. So as I mentioned, I'm involved with the Food Policy Council. Allison is going to share a link. Thank you, Allison, for our resource page, including this great video. And one thing I think about, I do a lot of food systems work in my day job. Pollinators are a critical part in our food system. About 1 of every 3 bites of food you eat was helped out by pollination, and it tends to be our healthier, more nutritionally dense foods that are often pollinated for free by our little friends. So top threats to pollinators, I think Karin covered this really well. And you can see a list there. And then I want to talk about something really sad that also happened in our community in 2020 was the monarch massacre. So this happened, they sprayed for mosquitoes, our local vector control, at the same time that the monarch migration was occurring, and sprayed a little bit before sunset. So this kind of created a perfect storm and resulted in a massive die-off of monarchs, which was incredibly sad to see that happen. But it also really activated people in the community, including myself. So here I had put all of this work into establishing my pollinator garden, picking out the right plants, weeding all the time to really give them a good start. And if we aren't protecting our pollinators from pesticides, are we really helping them? So it caused me to really think about that and think about what can I do in addition to planting flowers, because habitat is very important, food, very important. But what else can I do to help them? So some things that I thought about, and I think Karin set this up really nicely. Pollinators don't just need food, but they also need shelter. So they need places where they can hide, where they can seek cover when pesticides are being sprayed, and where they can overwinter. So you see on the left, a very beautiful picture of my garden, kind of at the peak blooming time in July. And then I think the picture on the right is even more important. That's what my garden looks like this week. So you'll notice, first of all, it's kind of a mess, right? There are leaves that I've intentionally left. There's the residue from the last growing season that I've intentionally left. Knowing that having that kind of year-round cover and habitat is really important. So I think part of thinking about pollinator habitat and what we can do in urban settings, I believe that we need to shift our aesthetic for what we think a neat and tidy yard or what we think a beautiful yard looks like. So here are a couple examples. The picture on the left is from a food co-op in North Carolina. And they have converted like every square inch of lawn that they had previously had, the little kind of islands in their parking lot. All of that was converted to a really stunning pollinator landscape. And then the other picture on the screen here is Moorhead's smallest park. It's a tiny little kind of island in the middle of a street that was converted to a pollinator garden. So, you know, even when they're at their most beautiful, I think this aesthetic can be a little chaotic and messy for people who are used to a neatly trimmed lawn or very highly manicured flower beds. So this is kind of my first proposal when we think about the community level is what can we do to kind of shift this aesthetic? And I like to talk about, I love having a boulevard garden because everyone talks to you if you're gardening in the boulevard. Backyard, not so much, but if you're out there right along the street, people love to stop and ask me about my flowers. My favorite question is, are you allowed to do this? And I love to just kind of explain what I'm doing, why, and do that level of kind of curbside advocacy with my neighbors. I think another piece that can really help with this shifting the cultural aesthetic is to embrace pollinators as art and placemaking. So there's a few different pictures here, some local, some from other places, where they've really used like actual works of art that promote pollinators next to a pollinator garden. There's a picture on the bottom in the middle of a pollinator hotel, which has lots of like mason bee houses and different types of homes that are suitable for different pollinators. And they made it look really nice and put up some signage. And then this picture, the blue bee in the bottom left, that is from Manchester, England, where, you know, it was a birthplace of the labor movement in the UK. And honeybees are kind of a powerful symbol of the labor movement. So Manchester has really embraced the bee as a symbol of their city, and they have pollinator gardens and beautiful bee statues throughout the city that kind of reinforces that bees are important to us and our identity as a community. There's so much that you can do to just promote and spread awareness about pollinator plantings that already exist or opportunities where there could be more. So this was a really easy to organize event that we did a few years ago with Resilient Moorhead and the food partners. That was just a simple like neighborhood walking tour where we identified 4 different sites and about a 3/4 mile loop that we could do and look at each of them. My garden was one of the sites. And it was just a great way to get people looking at different examples, getting people out walking in the community, talking to each other. We had a lot of representation from our local city council, public works department, parks department, and just a really nice way to spread that awareness and kind of help people see how accessible it can be too, to have a pollinator garden. Here's another event that we organized in partnership with the city of Moorhead, where they had taken some land on one of our parks and turned it into a food forest, or a community orchard, they're sometimes called. So we did an event. They also have a beautiful pollinator planting, which you can see on the left. And we did an event that featured a couple tours of the food forest, folks from the city talking about what you can harvest when, pointing out again that orchard crops are also, you know, they have multiple benefits. And I think Karin did a great job of talking about those. And then we also had an herbalist talk about medicinal plants. And, you know, some of the same plants like bee balm or bergamot that are really beautiful and attract a lot of bees are also great medicinal plants. So that idea of like a multifunctional urban landscape, I think is really a powerful one and an easy idea to promote. So this is where I do a time check because I can get really wonky on the policy side of things. If you ever want to talk policy, food policy, pollinator policy, please reach out to me. I'll make sure my email address is in the chat. But there's a lot of things that can happen at the local level to promote pollinators. So boulevard gardens, natural lawns is another policy that Moorhead has in place. And they made it even easier after we kind of had, I like to call it the Daisy episode, where someone in our community was told that she needed to mow down her daisies. She kind of challenged that a little bit. And it ended up being a big article in the paper and probably the biggest outcry I've ever seen in the local community about this woman's daisies. And she ended up being able to keep her daisy lawn. And as a result, the city looked at their natural lawn policy and made it a lot more accessible. So you don't even need a permit anymore to have a natural lawn in Moorhead. No mow May is another popular strategy that people talk about. There's some different thoughts on no mow May, but it's another one that the city of Moorhead puts into practice. Plantings on public land is another great strategy. Looking at your community's long-range planning documents where they set out broad goals for the community, that can be a great place to get language about pollinator habitat and pollinator protection. Formal partnerships, looking at vector control, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And in all of these, I think a key opportunity there's a lot of community support for pollinators. And, you know, being able to tap into that support, especially when something happens like the monarch massacre. That's probably the greatest time to advocate for pollinator habitat is when something like that happens. So speaking of vector control and pesticides, a lesson that I really learned from that experience is we have to go beyond planting flowers to really lean into the protection aspect. So I was one of the advocates that spoke out publicly, letter to the editor, here's an image of me on the local news. And a lot of people advocated for a change. And thankfully, our city leaders listened. So there's a whole long story about what it took to get Moorhead to change its approach to aerial spraying. That's a story for another time. But I just want to say at the local level, you know, you really can make a difference. It's easy to feel like we don't have a lot of control over what's happening right now, but going to your local officials with a positive idea can be incredibly powerful. And then here's just a few resources that I have found helpful, whether it's doing your own home garden planting, thinking about community advocacy, and what are some of the different departments that are a great place to start with. Organizations, and then really want to encourage people to think creatively about other kinds of resources. We have a strong arts community that loves to do pollinator plantings or educational events. We're also a community where people love to drink beer. So one of our local breweries does this fundraiser every year where they make a special beer that's brewed with honey. They also donate $1 of every pint sold back into pollinator habitat in Moorhead. So just one kind of creative example to get your wheels turning. And a quick recap: planting native flowers and prairie plants, waiting to clean up your yard waste until temps get about into the 50s, and then advocating not just for habitat, but for pollinator protection.
Oh, man. Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to, this is, Noelle, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for all your resources, both of our speakers. That was amazing. And I know that you only got a fraction of all the knowledge that you hold, and that, that we're going to, I don't know, we're going to probably hopefully do more of these. I know we are. So just thank you for joining us, and we're gonna get going on our Q&A sessions. And I appreciate Burke was kind of following along here. So I'll go off the top, and I just want to tell everyone that if you have time, I think we'll try to get all these questions answered, and if we don't, we might go past one. So that potentially is open, and this is a recording, and I think we started at the beginning that it will be available. Sorry, so let's start. What do you have to say about fall leaves? Move them to flower beds, leave some on the grass, chop them into the lawn. I'll
Want
let,
me to take that?
yeah, I see Karin off. Yeah, go for it.
I won't try to multitask and find a link, but Xerces has said a lot about this idea of leaving the leaves. There's a lot of strategic ways to do that. The reason we're suggesting that is that there are a lot of insects that use that for overwintering, because that's their food source. They decompose leaf litter. They need that cover underneath a tree canopy to pupate. So at least not like pulling the leaves off and putting them in a landfill or somewhere else, extracting them, moving them off site. But some people don't want to leave them straight on certain parts of lawns. You might move them. I would advise maybe not shredding them, because there are quite a few insects that are actually somehow bound up in that leaf, either because they're pupating like inside the leaf tissue, or because they're that just has some risks. If you're leaving leaves in order to protect insects, shredding them is probably detrimental. But you can move them to different places. But generally, kind of as a rule, when you're gardening or having some untidy spaces is really a way to support a lot of different insects in a somewhat passive way. That being said, there's and then one of our most recent blog posts came out a couple days ago saying hold off, don't rake up all your leaves, don't clean up your garden too soon, because insects are still sheltering under that and may need that protection. The only pushback I have on this whole notion of leave the leaves and all that is that I think sometimes it creates this idea that our garden is so precious that we will break it if we interact with it. And I don't like that tendency. I want us to interact with our garden. But I think being observant and watching what's happening and not being too aggressive, like that's the finesse to take.
The dance. And so encourage messy outside, and then try to work with whoever your roommate about the mess on the inside. Less insects. Okay. And all right, so we're going to this next one, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher this, I think, name of this. Thoughts on the idea of introducing Viper's bug loss to East Central Minnesota as we are experiencing an expansion of the mining industry. I will let anybody who knows what this question is.
I actually tried to do a quick search on that, and from what I can glean, because I didn't know it off the top of my head, and I consider myself a pretty proficient plant observer, but I think it's more of an herbal medicinal plant that I don't know as much about. Maybe it has some properties, some superpowers that allow it to pick up some minerals or heavy metals or something like that. Since I don't know that much about it, I would take the cautious approach and say I would be careful about introducing plants that don't have a natural history here, because we just don't really know what impacts they might have in our environment, especially if we bring them in at a scale that is kind of unprecedented. And I won't say anything more since I don't know much about that species.
Thank you, Karin. We have this one for Noelle. I think I've seen quite a few boulevard gardens that make the sidewalk inaccessible to people with disabilities. Do you have guidance for considering people with mobility challenges?
Absolutely. And I so appreciate this question. In an urban setting and in any setting, you got to be a good neighbor, right? So I always think about who are the most vulnerable people who might be using the sidewalk in front of my house, and making sure that plants are not hanging over across the sidewalk. So my boulevard garden, I don't have a sidewalk that runs along most of it, but I do have plantings right on the corner there where the intersection is. So, these are also things that the city planners think about too. And I know in my community, it's a 36-inch maximum height requirement, unless it's right by the driveway, and then it's shorter. And then the corner planting is even a little bit shorter for what's allowed. I think they allow 18 inches, and I really try and keep it down to a foot. So just, again, if things get taller than I want, I just dig them up and move them to a different part of my yard. But thinking about if there's a small child waiting to cross the street, will they be visible to a car that's driving by? And so I think, I apply the same logic when I think about what if someone is in a wheelchair trying to come down my street? So just, really being a good steward of your property, making sure that you keep your sidewalks clear, and then even going above and beyond sometimes what's in the policy itself to think about, who are the vulnerable people, who are the short folks using this space, and what's going to help them stay safe.
Thank you, Noelle. Yeah, Noreen, sorry.
Could we also just have everyone turn on their video just for a screenshot, please? Just for a second. If not, you could put a pop-it up or something if you don't feel. But we'd love to see your faces for a screenshot. Thank you. It'll just take a second. Okay, I think I got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Alex, next question.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Noelle. Now someone had asked, what about ants? What about ants and their role in
They're amazing. I don't know. There are so many famous entomologists like E.O. Wilson, who I mean, I'm not an ant biologist, by any means, but they just do so many. I mean, they're like little beavers in that they are really shaping the earth in ways that benefit and transform everything else in that system. Their channels that they're making and the way that they're transporting nutrients into these different systems and different spaces is vital. They're like, one thing that I've really started to learn more about is like we are starting to learn more about our microbiome and how important it is for our digestion. We have a microbiome on our skin, we have a microbiome in our bodies. Insects have that too. And so ants, in their sheer numbers and the fact that they have these microbiomes that they're moving around in underground and above ground, they're moving those different like microbiota throughout the system that other things can eat, that can and it's not just ants, but the channels they make are places where water can infiltrate, where roots take that path and borrow those channels. I did post a blog in the chat about how ants can even be important seed dispersers and kind of play certain plant community roles. So there's just a lot to say about ants, and I'm not the person to wax poetically about them because I don't know that much. But they're amazing and worth your time to go explore more about their biology.
Cool. All right. The crawlers, the creepy crawlers, the flyers. We want the diversity. Noelle, we had another question about salt application during the winters and how that may affect pollinators. Would you?
Yeah, that comes up a lot as a concern. I think this is another good advocacy opportunity. Learn about how your city uses road salt and if there are ways to ask them to be more conservative. I know Moorhead really tries to minimize how much we need to salt, so that's very helpful. I'll also say, where you live, if whether or not you're along kind of a major arterial road, I think could make a difference in whether or not you choose to do a boulevard garden. So that is one thing. I've also found, just from my experience, I was warned going into this that, boulevard garden or boulevards are dead zones, nothing will grow. That has not been true in my experience at all. But I'm also the type of gardener, I'm like chaos style, right? So I plant lots of different things, don't baby anything. I don't even water my garden. I only watered it after I planted that first year. But things need to be powerful if they're going to survive in my garden. And so if you're willing to kind of experiment and try a lot of different plants and just see what survives in your situation, I think that can be a strategy. Otherwise, there's also research around like plants that might be more salt tolerant, for example. And I'm going to guess that Xerces and other organizations probably have some great information on that, but it's definitely good to think about, in addition to salt and traffic, thinking about foot traffic too. And, I see people sometimes picking my flowers. I don't mind that because I have an abundance and I love to see people experiencing that joy that Karin talked about. When my plants get a little close to that 36 inches, I invite my neighbors to come make their own bouquets and take all the tallest ones first. So it's just kind of your, comfort level as far as how your garden is going to interface with the rest of the community.
Wonderful. Hey, and we're at 1 and I want to respect your guys' time. Are you both able to stay on a little longer to answer a few more questions?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. I have, let me back up. Sorry. They came in quick. So there's Lindsay who's just starting her own lawns to legumes landscape and is feeling overwhelmed. How can you stay focused on priorities while still going through the process?
So I can do this one quick, Karin, and then I want to hear what you say too. You don't have to plant it all at once. You can be planting all throughout the season up until the ground basically freezes with perennials. So, I kind of made the mistake of having my entire boulevard tilled at once. Bought about 70 plants, which I thought would fill up my entire car. And it was only 2.5 or 1.5 little trays. So I, just kept adding plants. And then I've learned a lot along the way and moved plants as I've needed to, or as I've had different ideas about how I want things kind of organized. So I would say start small, do a little bit at a time, and know that, things can always be moved later on if you find yourself in a position where you want to do that.
It's really great advice. And I think I give the same advice for smaller plantings that are kind of in the Lawn-to-Legumes category or small plots, as I do to larger plots, which is that small bites make it more manageable for you in the short term. And there's also so much like to be said for the experience you get out of that first taste that can be fed into your next bite, that you can approach it with so much more wisdom and so much more intuition about what you like or what you didn't like, or yeah, I mean, I think what I want people to have is success, and enough success to keep an appetite from growing more. And when they take off too much at once, it can feel completely overwhelming. And then there's the real risk of throwing out the whole thing. And yeah, I have so many little anecdotes that I have gleaned from working with my mother-in-law, who was a master gardener and a convert. Like when I first met her, she was like, knowing that I was a native plant person, she was like, "So how are your weeds doing?" She was very, thought she was it was sort of endearing. And then we eventually got her to create this habitat planting in her yard, but she took off, it drives her crazy every year. Every year she's like, "What are these plants? I can't remember what they are. It feels too wild for me," and I think if we had just done smaller bites, and you can create a very aesthetic native habitat planting and have it be on that tidier end, or you can go full like bohemian, whatever, there's just like, I think the smaller bites and learning from that experience and then feeding that into your next decisions is really important.
And I think too, with the pollinator, you guys touched on a little bit, but when we have the pollinator, we have the guys put the bees right in the center, smack in the buckwheat. And our production, you can just see where the bees were. And so it's almost doubled some of the production that we have, because buckwheat is lovely and the honey from it. So for us, it's got, like Noelle said too, you've got this miniature livestock that's working really hard, but you can see exactly where they were. Because at first, my husband was like, "Oh, well, now I have to move machinery around the bee boxes, blah, blah, blah." And then after he did the GPS on production, it was like, "Oh, can we get some more bees out there?" So, and it actually, when we were looking at the honeybees, it made the native bees actually made the honeybees work harder. We could tell a real distinct pattern where we hadn't really mowed. And Brian Bishop is a doctor at Concordia, and he confirmed. He said, "Yeah, it was your kind of." Because the honeybees are kind of like these endearing little people that don't want to go out when it's too cold or too wet. And native bees are out there like, all right, let's go eat. So really fun things that are coming out.
Awesome. Maybe, do we have time for one more? You want one more? Okay. I'll go back. We have a hobby farm. I want to convert 30 acres to something helpful for our Wisconsin land. We do rent out the 150 acres for hay, soy, and corn crops. What do you suggest? I think anyone.
I think whenever we're designing habitat or working with somebody who wants to diversify in any way, you know, we anchor it in what are their goals, what's their capacity. It's easy to dream, but then like implementing it, and then that I didn't really spend much time on this slide because I didn't want to cut into Noelle's time, but like really envisioning how you're going to steward that enhancement long term is really, really important because you went into it for a certain reason to support the wildlife. But it's really easy to have this idea that once it gets established, you can kind of be hands off. But I think that's sort of a misnomer, and habitat needs stewardship. It needs us. And so if you're not present and somebody else is renting it, then I would choose something that is manageable by a renter, or a scale that's small enough that feeds you, and that when you visit on a, you know, seldomly, you can maintain it. But 30 acres is a lot, and it depends on, maybe it's not a lot if it's like an alfalfa field that instead of harvesting 3 times, you harvest once, and instead of, and then you let, you know, some flowers bloom, and that's a whole lot of floral resources, but not a bunch of management. So there's just lots of different ways to approach it, but I think it really needs to be thoughtful about what the goals are really specifically and how you're going to manage it and implement it. It's just a little, that's how I always start.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone. This was tremendous. And you can always listen to the recording afterwards. Share with your friends too. Have them go to Minnesota womeninconservation.org or MNWiC, and you can listen to our past recordings. We want you to be part of this going forward too. Any questions, just send to us. We're happy to help you. And Noelle, Karin, kudos. What a wonderful, amazing presentation. Thumbs up.
Thanks to all of you. I mean, we are collective managers and we need all of us to be doing this good work. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Alex and everybody else, I do have to jump to another meeting. So hopefully if there's any,
Yeah.
you know, recap you want to do later, let me know. And we can jump on a call.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Karin.
Thank you so much, Karin.
Bye.
Thanks, Noelle.